Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Housing Committee. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on social media and use the hashtag London Housing for this meeting. Please may I remind participants to silence your devices. Our main item of business today is our third formal meeting of allocations in social housing. And before we begin, we have a few short items of business. Can I now ask the clerk Diane Richards if any apologies have been received.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from the Deputy Chair today, Assemblymember Moema, for whom Assemblymember Baker will be substituting today.
Great, thank you. And now on to number 2. We now come to declarations of interest. Can I ask if the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? No, great. Can I ask the committee to note the outstanding actions arising from its previous meeting? Great. And can we note the response to the Mayor of London? Can we note the response from the Mayor of London to our committee report, Breaking the Cycle: Housing Needs of Women Leaving Prison in London? Great. And that brings us on to our main item of business, allocations in social housing. Can I please welcome our first panel of guests? So we've got Daniel Reist, Senior Research Officer at Centre for London, Neil Morland, Independent Housing Consultant, Professor Catherine Brickell, Professor of Urban Studies, King's College London, and Dr. Mel Nowicki, Senior Lecturer in Urban Geography, Oxford Brookes University. And now we'll go on to our questions, and I will kick us off. So we do recognise the context that this investigation is sitting in is the lack of supply of social homes. We are really focusing on how the social homes that we do have are being allocated. So within that context, what do you see as the main challenges facing London's social housing allocation system? And I'm going to start with Mel. Thanks.
Today, sorry. So I'll just take that question. So contextually, we've been researching the relationship between debt, domestic abuse, homelessness and temporary accommodation. In this, I think one of the most significant challenges are housing-related debt rules that are blocking access to social housing for some of the most vulnerable in the city. So we've done FOI requests nationwide, read 294 allocation documents and done in-depth work with families. And what we can see is that these rules are negatively impacting low-income single mothers and domestic abuse victims living in temporary accommodation. And by victims, we mean both adults and children. So we know that stays need to be as short as possible, given the safety issues and trauma of temporary accommodation. But what we can see is that there can be a delayed transition out of temporary accommodation into social housing because of these housing-related debt rules. And just generally, the findings kind of concur with what Crisis have put in the news in the last week, that in England, just 27% of new social lettings go to homeless households. So allocation rules are essentially a process of kind of rationing. And what we can see is that some of the most vulnerable households are being denied access to housing, even though they are actually the families that are most in need of it. So London is the epicenter of this issue numerically in terms of housing-related debt rules. So for context, 91% of London's 32 boroughs have a debt disqualification policy in their allocation policies, compared to 88% in England. And for 1 month of data, 79% of disqualified households in England living in temporary accommodation actually come from a London borough. So that's over 3,000 households. Yeah, okay. So we asked for 1 month of data from every local authority through an FOI process. That was for December 2023. So 79% of disqualified households in England who were disqualified by these housing-related rules live in a London borough. So there are 3,000 households in that 1 month who were disqualified from bidding or accessing social housing while they're in temporary accommodation. Now, nearly half of these include at least one child under the age of 18. And actually, when we look at the national data, so 49% of households in England impacted by disqualification rules actually only came from 3 London boroughs. This was Ealing, Westminster and Lambeth. So the highest numbers of households impacted were Ealing, which was 994 households in 1 month alone. Now, this is very much the known tip of an iceberg when it comes to London. So only 18 out of 32 London boroughs provided us figures, and we can go into later why that may be the case. But these figures that we hold are gross underestimate of how these debt-related qualifications can be a barrier.
Thank you. Neil, do you want to follow up directly to that? Yeah, sorry.
How do we know there are gross underestimates? Because I sit on committees here and in the House, and people always say things underreported, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
What's your evidence for that?
So only half of London boroughs gave us data. And some of those London boroughs, for example, could give us data on the numbers of households that they have disqualified, but they couldn't actually tell you how many children under the age of 18. Some didn't even know how many they had disqualified because they don't actually count how many they disqualify. So either it exceeded FOI rules in terms of time, or they would have to do a manual trawl through their data because they don't actually keep on top of who they are disqualifying. So I say it's a gross underestimate because the London boroughs that have reported, the figures are huge. So if only half reported, and there are some boroughs that have huge numbers in temporary accommodation who did not report to us. So that's why. So
you're effectively saying, which I agree with,
Yeah.
It's a fair estimation to say it's hugely underreported.
Yeah.
One very last tiny question.
Yeah.
What would be the power of collecting those stats? So imagine we could wave a magic wand, make them collect those stats. What would be the power, what they could be used for?
So you come on to data later.
Oh, okay.
I
can pick that one up later.
Right?
That's not
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Go on then.
Sorry, my colleague is happy for you to answer that now.
Okay, that's fine. So, if you can't count something, you can't be held accountable. Okay. So, from an equalities point of view, what we can see in our data collection, the extent to which we can understand it through this FOI process and through working with families, that there is a disproportionate burden on low-income single mothers and children. So from an equalities point of view, it's problematic, and potentially if a local authority is disqualifying a household in which there is a woman domestic abuse survivor, and that survivor is in debt because of that domestic abuse, that potentially could be unlawful because it's discriminatory.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can I have a sup?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Already lots of rich information. So, Neil, the same question to you about what the main challenges facing London's housing association allocation systems are, and if you wanted to touch on any aspects that might benefit from greater standardisation. That would be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the biggest challenge is the rules around allocating social housing are really confusing. Actually, the law... Sorry, is that better? My apologies. Yeah. Either way, yeah. Be nearer is the headline there. Yeah, the rules for allocating social housing are really complicated. If you spend any time reading the Housing Act 1996 Part 6 and all the bits of secondary legislation that are attached to it, then you'll know how complicated it is. And you know, we can see that it's complicated because local authority employees that administer housing allocation functions wouldn't be making unlawful decisions if the rules were fairly straightforward. So understanding housing allocation law is challenging for local authorities, it's challenging for housing associations, and it's challenging, therefore, for members of the public who are interested in being allocated social housing. Local authority, there is no mandatory training for local authority employees who have to allocate social housing. The role is similar to a paralegal, really. They're making quasi-judicial decisions, they're making public law decisions, and there's no mandatory level of educational attainment or mandatory introductory training or ongoing professional development training. So that means how people might approach the job will vary quite considerably. Housing associations, when they allocate social housing, they're beholden to public law as well. And yet the regulator doesn't say this in their code of practice or in their regulatory standards. There's no statutory guidance for housing associations. There's 5 different ones for local authorities, which must be confusing for them. I'm sure they'd rather just everything in one. So housing associations say don't even realise half the time that they're beholden to public law duties when allocating social housing. So overall, it's really confusing, actually, and so it's no wonder people aren't sure how housing is allocated and how it should be allocated, and there's no wonder that people then get concerned that there may be a lack of transparency in the way social housing is allocated. I was reflecting in advance of the session today. I've worked in housing for nearly 30 years, and when I first worked in housing, the allocation of social housing was the opposite of what it is now in most areas, where supply and demand were completely flipped, and in many local authorities they were just really pleased someone wanted to have a council house, and may not necessarily regularly have regard to their housing allocation rules because they were just pleased that someone wanted to take a council house. So the change in the space of 30 years has been quite incredible. And that is for all the supply issues but it is also for wider factors in the sense that housing associations and local authorities are really good at helping people sustain their tenancies, and we want them to do that, and they have got much better over the past 30 years in doing that, and that's absolutely right. But the consequence of being really good at sustaining tenancies is there's less homes available to relet. More broadly, social care policy has, again, empowered people to remain in their home even when they're vulnerable and got multiple and complex needs. And again, the consequence of that is there is more people sustaining social housing tenancies and therefore less homes to relet. So there is an element of have we built enough homes to keep up, but there is an element of broader policy is keeping people in their homes for all the right reasons and all good reasons. And as we see from official statistics, that means the number of people on social housing waiting lists goes up. The number of lettings continues to fall each year, every year, and it has done for the past 10 years, the number of lettings. So it becomes a real tension point there that then again adds to that kind of concern around the transparency on how housing is allocated.
Thank you. There's a number of issues there. Daniel, did you want to come in? And if you wanted to, speak to any bits that might benefit from a Pan-London framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Pan-London framework is something we've explored at Centre for London. We've considered how a more effective standardised approach to housing allocations could work, because as it stands and have other panellists have mentioned, the current landscape for allocations policy is extremely complex and largely at the discretion of local authorities to handle in their own spaces. That makes it very tricky for stock transfers between boroughs, but also stock transfers between councils and housing associations. It's also fair to say that the supply crisis with social housing is very much an undercurrent. This allocations policy wouldn't, if we simply just added another 300,000 social homes to the mix, the allocations policy would still remain a challenge. And it's fair to say that local authorities are very good and very efficient at keeping their stock. Now that the sort of end of the right to buy sort of era has made local authorities much more aware of their dwindling stock numbers. So all in all, I think there is an absolute case for a pan-London allocation scheme, something which the Mayor could actually really benefit, whether through a statutory function or non-statutory.
Do you want to say anything else just about that last comment that you just made?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because there's obviously a tension between the boroughs having ultimate control and, as I said, discretion with regards to housing allocations. One borough will not be the same as another borough, and actually inputting a allocations policy which doesn't work for an outer London borough but does for an inner London borough would lead to tensions. Therefore, if there was to be one at a pan-London level, it would need to be convened and coordinated by the Mayor, but not necessarily regulated by the Mayor, because that would lead to further discrepancies and difficulties between boroughs as well.
And you think that would help with standardising practice and some of the issues that have been made by other colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely, because at the core of it, the Housing Act 1996 labelled the core reasons why people should be given social housing for a variety of reasons and whether they're vulnerable households. The discretions that have been brought in have been largely through economic conditions or through political reasons, additional aspects such as Homes for Ukraine or the Afghan resettlement scheme, additional burdens on local authorities to actually administer social housing. So this adds to an already complicated and complex regulatory system, which has also been added to a new sort of consumer standards practice, which councils are coping with the regulator as well.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey, a quick follow-up.
Very quick follow-up. So, in your ideal world of a pan-London scheme, would that mean Londoners would have to move across London? So if I popped up in Hammersmith and a place come up in Havering, am I off? Is that what the scheme would mean? Or is it a scheme that is pan-London but only looks the borough you're in? What would it mean?
It's a really good question. I think we would want to avoid any kind of moving families halfway across London, simply because the community values which a person has in their own borough, in their neighbourhoods at a social housing level is really important. And while there certainly is more availability in some parts of London, our research last year highlighted outer London boroughs perhaps have some significantly lower levels of waiting times for specific housing. The idea that we should be, forcing people to move because there's more availability in a part of London, it's complicated and certainly not palatable. But I would say that whether it's a non-statutory designation for housing allocations policy could be done through a system of convening local authorities together with housing associations to better understand what is the need at a local level and what might work as a pan-London level, as with the Housing Moves programme.
Okay. So you seem to want to come in, Neil.
If that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's two examples you can look at here that are really important. There is a single housing allocation scheme for Northern Ireland. The executive Northern Ireland.
Okay.
The executive has a Northern Ireland housing executive, and it has a single register for social housing for all local authorities and housing associations in the province. And that model could easily be replicated here in Greater London.
But could it? Because my challenge. Almost, what is the point of a London-wide scheme if you're not exposing people in Hammersmith to Havering and Peckham to Isleworth? Moving is you're tearing up your roots, but it's moving versus nowhere to live. So also, one last challenge to you.
Sorry, go on.
Northern Ireland is tiny compared to London. There's roughly getting over 10 million of us here. It's some 1.5 million people there. Mm-hmm. You're not comparing like with like, are you?
Not necessarily, but there's a principle of having a common approach. And certainly all the people I speak to, so I work with local authorities and housing associations, but I speak to people who are on a housing register or would like to be on a housing register. And they're not interested in the local authority or the housing association. What they're interested in is being on the housing register, and they don't see the boundaries in the way we might do. Many people don't consciously appreciate what local authority they're living with or within, actually. And a pan-London housing allocation scheme, which was discussed when MHCLG provided funding for sub-regional schemes back in 2008, 2009. The then MHCLG, which I was at that time, allocated out funding to help set up sub-regional schemes, and the discussions didn't go very far in London. But most other counties outside of London established sub-regional schemes that had a degree of commonality to greater or lesser extents, depending on what that area wanted. So there's precedents across all parts of England, or most parts of England, of having common housing allocation schemes. There's a single scheme for what's a very complex locality in terms of Northern Ireland, with some aspects of housing demand and supply. Wales has got a bill, which I know you've heard about in previous sessions, that will require every individual local authority in Wales to have a common housing allocation scheme. So again, in each local authority area, all 22, there'll be a single register where everybody will be able to apply to. An individual, a member of the public, won't have to think, how many application forms do I have to fill in? How many registers do I have to get on? They'll just fill in one application form for any given area. That's better than the current situation. A pan-regional one is even better. That's certainly what members of the public always lead with when I talk to them.
Thank you. That's a great detail. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Over to Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you. So some of the sort of similar, how would this work? I mean, there's actually less than 2 million people that live in the whole of Northern Ireland. There are reasons why you might have wanted to introduce it that relate to the Good Friday Agreement and things like that. You can probably get across the whole of Northern Ireland in less time than it would take you to drive from one side of London to the other. I can certainly, if I get on a train, get to Wales more quickly than I can drive across London, or get public transport across London. It's going to take you about the same amount of time. So we are talking of a different order of magnitude. So if there was one application form, you would then have to subdivide each borough into the many different villages contained within it. My constituency is 2 boroughs, 5 parliamentary constituencies. But if I look at just, let's say, the Wandsworth part of the constituency, which is the bigger borough, I've got Tooting, I've got Fursdown, I've got Balham, I've got Earlsfield. You're going to end up with quite a long list just from one borough. Replicate that across the whole of London, and that's a lot of pages. Most people probably wouldn't be interested in going from one side of London to the other. Are you sure that this would be a better way of working?
To draw on your public transport analogy, up until very recently, if you've lived outside of London, you wished you lived in London for the purposes of public transport because you've had a common public transport system. And outside of London, you've had to have multiple ticket types with multiple operators who have operated services at their convenience rather than the member of the public who wants to travel on public transport.
TfL would happily take over all of that public transport just outside London, just FYI.
So, that analogy of, if you speak to the people of Greater Manchester, they're delighted now that they have an integrated public transport system because they've got one ticket and a common approach to using public transport. And the same principles applies with the allocation of social housing. How far a common scheme went, whether as in Wales they're requiring each local authority to have a common scheme, or whether in Northern Ireland where there's a common scheme for an entire province, how far that might work for London has to be carefully considered. But the degree of commonality, to some greater or lesser extent, is the thing that members of the public most talk to me about when I'm consulting with them on housing allocation schemes. Is the confusion of multiple application forms, multiple registers, multiple criteria to get on the register, multiple criteria to be shortlisted for an allocation. They want a greater degree of commonality. So how far you take that commonality is something to be carefully considered. But there are examples from Wales from next year where should the bill be passed in Parliament, there'll be a requirement for each local authority to have a common scheme for its area. Or, say, in Northern Ireland, there's another example where there's a common scheme for a wider footprint. And I guess it's for the Assembly to decide what might be most appropriate for London.
So I can see some advantages in having a sort of commonality there. I've had people come into my advice surgery, and, wanted to be moved from where they were because they'd been rehoused into temporary accommodation that was very close to where the person who'd abused them was living, and they wanted to move to another borough, but they were very specific about where they wanted to go because they wanted to also then be near family for reasons of childcare that we're all familiar with. On the other hand, I've also had people come into my advice surgery and they've been moved from southwest London to Loughton, which I consider to be in Essex, but it is in fact part of a London. I don't even know where it is. It's northeast London. Sean can probably tell me. But it's a very long way away on the central line, I believe. And so in the temporary accommodation, the woman was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get all the children ready so that she could get on the central line and then the northern line to come all the way back down to Tooting to then get her children into the schools where they were, and she didn't want to move them out of because we have an Islamic primary school and her children were there, and we have a couple of secondary schools, and she didn't want to move them because it was, because they were coming up to a crucial period in their education, and it was taking her 2.5 hours to travel there in the morning. Then she had to sit around in the locality.
Can we have a question? We're running.
I don't see how that is, there are problems here, surely, even if you have a pan-London approach, because people might be asked to move to places they don't want to go, even though it might have the benefits of being able to move people more easily who need it as well.
I accept what you're saying. I think the principle of the common allocation scheme is reducing the number of forms people have to fill in, the number of registers they have to apply to, the number of rules they have to understand. It doesn't mean that they then would have to move across different parts of London. That's about the extent of choice an individual might wish to have, and then that's a separate element of it. The common schemes that operate in other areas of the country already don't require people to make large moves across huge distances within a county or a geographical
Okay, but in the situation that we're in at the moment, sorry, Charles, just to follow up this one, a lot of people are made it's a one-off policy from local authorities, and it's a like it or lump it, and if they consider that they have discharged their homelessness responsibility to you because you've just refused to move to, I don't know, Roehampton, which is actually not very easy to get to on public transport, to go back to that point, and because people want to stay in Tooting and they don't want to move to Roehampton, and they're only 6 miles apart.
Can I just come in and say that we haven't designed the model here, and I think that you know, you could have a place where someone could tick the boroughs that they'd be happy to move to, right?
But it's
And they
also
wouldn't have to-
subsections within boroughs, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Sorry, can
But
I
I'm
just bring in
And then can you go on
Daniel?
to the housing associations bit
I
as
will
well?
do.
Thank you.
I just wanted to explore that a bit further.
No, I thank you. And I mean, just to be clear, I think that at this point, let's remove place from the angle and focus on the policies.
Yeah.
In this case, the issues that are ingrained in many local authorities in their social housing allocations policies is the level of which you are a banding system. Some are on a different banding system there is no commonality between local authorities in London, and that's the point of having a pan-London approach where there can be discrepancies between boroughs, absolutely, whether that's based on location, but at the core of a pan-London approach would be an approach which has equal banding. It's understood in each borough, where you can apply on the housing register in Lambeth, and it makes sense in Redbridge, that kind of thing. It's also worth saying, as you know, we've discussed it through place, local authorities are already very, very good at making incentives for things like public transport. So when we're talking about downsizing or right-sizing, most local authorities in London, if not all, will have a sense of incentive, whether it's financial aid or the actual practical approach to asking people to, helping people with their moves. Hammersmith and Fulham, for example, actually can help you with unblocking your toilet and getting rid of your washing machine. That kind of a level of integration is really important. And secondly, in that, there is also a level of where local authorities are very good at understanding place because they have a place-based letting system. So already residents have some level of control in their current borough. The idea that you can take it to a more pan-regional approach is not too far gone, although it is, as I mentioned earlier, it is not acceptable, I believe, to be forcing people away from their neighbourhoods through some kind of pan-regional approach. The way we should be doing it is through policies rather than place.
Okay, so that's the how it might start to work out between the different local authorities. As the chair just alluded, there's also this situation between local authorities who allocate one set of social housing tenancies, and then you've also got housing associations who are now pretty much integrated in many ways with local authorities, but still to a greater or lesser extent. So how are they also affected by the lack of coordination between the different boroughs and the different housing associations? And obviously housing associations randomly operate very heavily in some boroughs and then not at all in the neighbouring borough, and then lots in the borough beyond that.
It's a really good question. And I think, as Neil mentioned, there is a lack of legal framework to this, where local authorities and housing associations absolutely work very closely together. Some have had some housing associations have taken on the role of being the registered provider in local authorities, and that has developed a really good relationship. But the allocations policy in housing associations can be and often is very different to local authorities, and that creates a confusion and ultimately leads to vulnerable households, really struggling to actually access social housing. At the core of this is social housing needs to be more of a common practice which is shared between housing associations and local authorities. In our research, we've shown that social housing providers in sort of the registered provider sector through housing associations have certainly taken on the mantle and increased their stock compared to local authorities who've lost their stock through right to buy, and there seems to be a lack of communication or a lack of commonality between both providers in actually accessing these levels of allocation.
I can see that Neil would like to come back in, and then I'm going to come to Catherine and Mel for some other issues.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I agree with what Daniel's saying. In Scotland, housing allocation law has always been separate to the law in England and Wales. In Scotland, it is the case, and has been since 1987 at least, that local authorities that don't own stock, that have transferred their stock, there's 8 in Scotland, don't have to allocate social housing. All social landlords, whether it's local authorities or housing associations, do have to allocate housing. They all have to follow the same legislation. So Scotland have taken a different position on this entirely, and the law around allocating social housing applies equally to local authorities that are stock retained as it does to housing associations. There is still laws in England that dictate housing allocations for housing associations. It's the Housing Act 1985, Section 106. Enjoy it. It requires local authorities to publish. It requires housing associations to publish rules that explain how they will prioritise people for an allocation, and it requires housing associations to provide a copy of their housing allocation rules to every local authority in which they hold stock. you can go and ask local authorities how many housing associations supply them a copy of their rules. As I said previously, the regulator doesn't mention this law in their regulatory standards or their code of practice, and none of the membership bodies mention this, and there's no statutory guidance or voluntary guidance for housing associations. So it's no wonder there's inconsistency perhaps between what housing associations might do and what local authorities might do, and there's inconsistency then as to a person a local authority might select for an allocation versus a person a housing association might select for an allocation. Not wanting to retread too much, but the proposed legislation in Wales will require a common register in each local authority area to which everybody will be placed on, and then the local authority and the housing associations that own stock in that area will all select people off that common register. So a single form, a single set of rules that decide who gets on, and a single set of rules for how much priority a person has had, and then each individual organisation will select a person for a relevant vacancy, which will again allow better cooperation and collaboration.
Okay, that's the one that Wales is moving towards. Do you think the Scottish system also has merit? It sounds as though you...
I do. I think the Scottish system is very clear. The Scottish system says, you know, if you're a social landlord, we don't mind whether you're a housing association or a local authority, this is the law you need to follow. And I think that's much clearer for everybody. Yeah.
Okay. I just wondered if I could come to Catherine and or Mel. And how do you think this lack of coordination, I mean, I referred to, you know, the person who came to me and was having trouble moving near family because they had no local connection, well, not a very strong local connection, although they had some family there. How do you think it's affecting the outcomes for domestic abuse survivors who are trying to start a new life or flee either of those situations?
Yeah, thank you. That came up quite a lot in the research that we conducted, where even residents or participants in our research who were part of a local authority or were on the allocation system for a local authority where they weren't being penalised for housing-related debts might then find that the housing association do. So we kind of saw a story of one door perhaps being opened in the local authority, but then the next door at the housing association being shut, and that was kind of a common theme that we saw repeatedly, and something that we followed up with in more recent research that we conducted alongside the Chartered Institute of Housing. We published a report last week on this, where we conducted some further work looking at the allocation policies in relation to housing-related debt. This is for around 20 housing associations, so significantly less than the 294 or whatever it was that we looked at local authority-wise. But in terms of numbers, that included some of the major housing associations. So the impacted households of the allocation policies that we explored amounted to over 350,000. And what we found there was a kind of similar picture to the local authority one, in that the vast majority of providers don't include housing-related debt rules in their allocation policy. So the odds of, even if you kind of get through the local authority door, then having the housing association door closed to you are very high. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say there. Just to flag as well, I suppose that's in line with what Liz Davis, KC, had said at this panel a couple of months ago when in the first panel of this inquiry as well. So there's clearly an issue of kind of lack of connectivity across and between local authorities and housing associations that are having a real life effect on domestic abuse survivors, among others.
So coming back to Neil and possibly Daniel, one or other of you, do you think there's a role for the mayor? I mean, you were referring more, I think, to legal changes or the Scottish system or the system Wales is about to bring in. But do you think there's a role for the mayor to improve the coordination between councils and housing associations? And if it's not the role of the mayor stroke City Hall, whose role would it be to improve that coordination, if anyone's?
I do think the mayor has a role to do that. I think it's about making best use of stock in London, and I think the mayor has a legitimate stakehold in that. I think I think devolution has been brilliant for the UK, and actually Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have been able to really innovate around housing law, and as a result they've been able to introduce progressive approaches, and I think there's no reason why the Mayor shouldn't pursue devolution of housing allocation law if that's what the Mayor and the Assembly think is the best and right thing. To just go back to the point that Mel was making around debt, for example, there is a specific piece of legislation in Scottish housing allocation law that deals with all of the issues that Mel has uncovered. You can't be excluded from a housing list in Scotland if you've got debt as a result of domestic abuse. And if you've set up a repayment plan and made 3 repayments, you have to be let on the list, and your debt is only looked at in terms of housing debt. We can't take into account parking tickets or council debt or things like that. So again, there is elements of legislation already in place that work incredibly successfully that we could pull in and create a better framework, either through law or just voluntarily adopting through a set of standards. So I think there is a role for the Mayor to potentially promote non-statutory guidance or good practice, or to foster a pan-London scheme or sub-regional schemes or local authority common schemes, depending on the extent of enthusiasm for all of that.
Daniel, do you want to come in as well?
And we need to move on.
Yeah, I'll be quick and say that it's fair to say that sometimes the relationship between the Mayor and the councils can be a little frosty, but there is some real strength in coordination here that can be done through a standardised data framework. So at the moment, as has been mentioned, well, through the work which Mel and Catherine have done, Centre for London also did a report last year which looked at the levels of allocations in each borough. We did a FOI process, and we managed to get half of London boroughs actually giving us data, either through not simply responding. Sorry, it was around 2/3 of London boroughs gave us data. Those who didn't said that they just don't collect the data centrally, or they didn't respond, or they don't do it in a certain way which makes it accessible to the public, or that it's for legal reasons or for financial reasons they don't include it in their FOI requests, which makes it very difficult. If a pan-regional allocations policy or scheme isn't appropriate, then a data level, a data standardisation framework absolutely is something which the Mayor can do, because it's at the end of the day about transparency and scrutiny.
I think we're going to come to data, so I'm definitely going to wrap up now. Thank you very much to the panel.
Thank you. Over to Assemblymember Lord Bailey on fairness and treatment.
Thank you. Just to finish the Pan-London thing, I think it's about a Pan-London register, not an allocation scheme. I think we got a bit sidetracked by that. But listen, I'm going to speak to the doctor. How does no debt requirement in allocation disadvantage low-income mothers and women who have experienced domestic abuse?
Thanks. Doctor shout out as well. Very much so is the response to that. Through our research and other kind of data to back this up, these no debt requirements within allocation policies are further disadvantaging already highly disadvantaged groups. So to turn to kind of single parents, 90% of which are mothers, although single mothers only account for 7% of the population, they're one of the most disproportionately indebted groups in the country. So as an example statistic, a quarter of Step Change Debt Charity, so one of the major national debt charities in the country, a quarter of their clients are single mothers. A third of households in temporary accommodation are headed by single mothers. 1 in 38 mothers in England, single mothers in England, are homeless. So these are pretty hard to turn away from statistics in terms of the disproportionate impact of homelessness and kind of financial hardship that single parents, disproportionately those of whom are single mothers, face. So in some London boroughs, in the most recent quarterly figures published by the government, almost half of households in temporary accommodation are headed by single mother households. In Lewisham, for example, 47% of the total number of households in TA in Lewisham are headed by single mother households. Single mothers of dependent children, I should add. So domestic abuse then overlays a lot onto this group. So in terms of numbers of domestic abuse survivors presenting as homeless to local authorities, that's 16% of all households who present as homeless do so as a consequence of domestic abuse. And from our research, we found that, so we worked exclusively in our most recent research with single mothers, the vast majority of whom had been impacted also by domestic abuse. So many of the mothers that we worked with their homelessness had been triggered by economic coercion, financial control, partners taking out loans in their name without telling them, not contributing to household bills or rent, for example, withholding access to any cash or any kind of funds. So, for example, one perpetrator left the country for weeks on end, took all of the debit cards and left his partner with nothing to keep going with her and her children. So those are some of the examples. And then the cost of fleeing itself. So when fleeing, perpetrators, domestic abuse survivors are often fleeing with nothing, but the clothes on their backs and immediately entering destitution and homelessness. And this was described to us as kind of surviving and then being punished again when mothers then entered the temporary accommodation system, only to find that they were trapped there because of debts that had been accrued as a consequence of their abuse, meaning that they were unable to apply to bid for social housing or get on kind of an allocations list. I have brought with me a very brief kind of outline of one of our participants' stories, if there's time for me to.
We probably haven't got time for that, but we will absolutely take it in writing. We'll take it right. The question I want to ask, which might not even be the arena, we might have to do some writing as well. Is there any help for these single mothers before this case to help them with the debts, to avoid the debts? Is anybody there to say to them? Because what must be a horrific surprise is when you then go to apply and they say, well, you can't even get on because of the debt. Is there anybody to even explain the rules or any of these things at all?
I think that's very patchy and part of ultimately what we found. I know this term gets bandied around a lot, but we certainly found kind of a postcode lottery in our work where there were certainly organisations in place to kind of support with debts, but I think especially when your debts are so bound up in the abuse that you have experienced, A, you might not even know about half of them until it's kind of too late, and B, having to sit and go through every bill and every kind of piece of debt. Which you might not even have access to. You might not have access to, and it's also often a re-traumatising process as well, of having to kind of relive the abuse that you've experienced. So I think there's... it's definitely not kind of a hard no, but the picture around support is quite complicated.
Just before you come in, Catherine, Neil and Daniel might want to have a little stab at this question as well. What's the other side of this argument? Because if you're the local authority, there's no part of... Everybody in this room will agree that local authorities are not being mean. They have a low level of resource to administer. What is their approach to that? Why are they saying the rule has to be this way? Let Catherine come in first, but try to help us walk through that.
So as you're probably aware, that there can't be blanket bans, and so there are rules. There are expressions of discretion on these allocation schemes, not in every case, but the fundamental problem is that discretion doesn't always get used. It gets used variably. Again, the postcode lottery, it depends about whether the person is trained, how compassionate the person is, whether they choose to use discretion. So a lot of local authorities say back to us, but we use our discretion. But given the lack of understanding and training, both when it comes to allocation rules, but also the nature of domestic violence and economic violence, that discretion is just simply not enough.
And discretion in and of itself is arbitrary.
Correct.
It's based on
but
my
it's a
belief system,
clause.
all manner of things, isn't it? Okay.
Local authorities are disqualifying people from joining their housing register for rent arrears because often the person's been evicted for that very thing, and they feel it would be almost irrational for you to be evicted today and then rejoin the housing register tomorrow for the very thing that you've just been evicted for. I think, again, there is an inconsistency in how local authorities and housing associations approach this, and this is why I like the legislation in Scotland, because it sets it down really clearly as to what is permissible to contend with when someone is applying to join the housing register with rent arrears. The legislation makes it really clear in Scotland as to what amount of arrears are permissible and what amount are not. There's lots of research that shows people in a social housing tenancy are more likely to pay down and pay off their rent arrears compared to people that are not. So the Scottish approach takes the emphasis on a person's commitment to acknowledge their debt and begin to repay their debt without the requirement to repay it to a certain level. It's about the commitment to set up a repayment plan and get on with that repayment plan. And that culture and that approach has shown to work. So I think it's proportionate to say someone might be disqualified for rent arrears, but I think it's equally important to say when you've demonstrated a commitment to acknowledge your debt and repay your debt to a certain extent, then you absolutely need to be allowed on. But there absolutely needs to be safeguards for people that have accrued a debt as a result of domestic abuse through no fault of their own. That can't be used against them.
Okay.
Yeah, I just add on that around sort of the high needs of certain communities, in this case being single mothers. I mean, it's fair to say that the allocations policies which go ahead in local authorities quite often will band people together into general needs blocks. So the individual placing of people into buildings, into social housing blocks, can often be a detriment to their future because there is less community cohesion, there's not enough support, and that might be a reason why in this conversation around discretion, local authorities may be feeling less adept at tackling certain issues because they do not have the capacity to appropriately have a pathway towards, if it's debt advice or if it's domestic abuse or if it's violence against women and girls or if there's a racial or ethnic disparity issue in there. There's a level of capacity which councils themselves don't have, and that really does translate down into the allocations into individual blocks as well. So it's a real challenge.
Okay, and just finally, back to Dr. Catherine, how nuanced is the collecting of the data about the experience that the survivor may have been through? Is it just domestic violence and everybody's in that category, or is there levels? How do you test the circumstance? Is it true? Because I've worked in many a poor community. I come from a very poor community, and people get adept at twisting the rules. So how do you mitigate for all these things? Because I think if you're going to ask for extra support for people, we need to target on the people who really need it, not the people who are very good at getting things to happen for them because they say the right things and do the right things. So how much nuance is there? How much accuracy is there in finding survivors, and then so we can then support them into the future? Catherine, by all means.
So if you're asking for kind of questions of proof, I think that came up in the first panel with Liz Davis KC, in the sense that housing officers can request kind of collaborative evidence of domestic abuse, but they also need to recognise that survivors might not have it. And that would be the case around if that debt was accrued in relation to domestic abuse, because they have you can't assume that they will necessarily have that information to hand. So in that sense, I think there would need to be more legal clarification through Liz Davis, but my understanding is that it would follow that principle around domestic abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd just like to add quickly, if I can, as well, that there's, I suppose, what we found in working with women was often the opposite of total disbelief and not having kind of access to support because, you haven't gone to the police before, therefore that can't have happened to you, and completely disregarding all of the many kind of complex reasons why turning to the police might not be the first thing you do if you're a domestic abuse survivor, or what domestic abuse can look like beyond physical abuse in terms of kind of psychological harm, coercive control, not even understanding yourself to be a victim of domestic abuse for years at a time. So I would say from our own experience working with women, we found the opposite, the struggle to be believed in these scenarios.
I suppose the deeper question we'll ask at a different date is how do we fill that gap? How do we help people express those experiences? But I'm going to go back to the chair.
Yeah, thank you. On to Assemblymember Baker for your questions on data and transparency.
Thank you. Yes. So, yeah, my questions are on data, which we've touched upon a few times. But just as a general question, How practically do you think better data and transparency across local housing authorities can improve outcomes for Londoners on waiting lists? Does anyone want to jump in, please?
I'm happy to go first. So I guess we've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
But what we can see is that local boroughs are having to do manual trawls, are not able to put their kind of data on household types together with decisions that they're making, or know how many households have been impacted by their own policies. And I think this comes back to a real requirement to refocus on equality impact assessments, which clearly are just not systematically happening, because so many local authorities in London aren't able to even say who is impacted by their own policies that they have put in place. So, how do they potentially negatively impact people with protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010? There needs to be practical steps in terms of advocating through the mayor for a renewed kind of training, energy, resourcing. And I think we can speak about it later, but there are London boroughs that have worked with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance on some of these issues around data capture. And there's definitely training that could happen. And I don't know if any of the others could speak to equality impact assessments or other ways in which, that needs to be pushed further.
Yeah, I've got some. Please do come in. I've got some follow-up questions on that, but yeah, it'd be good to hear.
Generally on data,
yeah.
I agree there needs to be more information collected and analysed. Decisions about who should be allocated social housing must be, to a reasonable extent, data-driven. We must have evidence-based policies, and data is a good source of that evidence. In England, we have the best data on housing waiting lists and lettings of all the UK nations. Some of the other nations are very envious around the amount of data that local authorities and housing associations have to report to central government. So, I don't want to dismiss the work that already goes on to collect data and to publish statistics on housing waiting lists and lettings, because I think a lot of really good work goes on. But compared to when homelessness statistics are published, when housing allocations and letting statistics are published, there's no scrutiny from media, mainstream or sometimes specialist media. The attention to that data is just overlooked. So often you won't know that last month the annual statistics on housing waiting lists were published because nobody was talking about it except perhaps me and a few other people that are interested in that type of stuff. So actually, there's a lot of data out there already that I use regularly with local authorities to inform what their housing allocation schemes look like. The local authorities and housing associations simply aren't interrogating well enough already. So yes, we need more data, but we need to make better use of the existing data that we've already got. And for example, there's no data on how many disabled people need new housing.
I think you're all saying the same thing, but it sounds like you're saying different things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So are you saying that there is lots of data, but key bits of that information that are needed, for instance, in order to carry out, because it's a bit of a circular thing with equality impact assessments. If you don't have the right data, you can't do the equality impact assessments. But if you don't have the impact assessment to see that something might be going wrong, then the drive to collect it might not be quite clear to the people at the front line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if I could just come in on that as well. I mean, fully agree with comments already made. The lack of a standardised data set in a council on its own, regardless of a pan-London approach, is so important, because otherwise those vulnerabilities, those households which are facing hardship and real discrimination can slip through the cracks, and often do. And that, as I mentioned earlier, is really important for holding councils to account. It also impacts the level of support that other public services can provide. So, if we're talking about a housing-related domestic abuse case, the ability for the NHS or supported care services, the schools that are affected by this, the education, all of that needs to be informed by the single data standard in a single council. There is also a case that you mentioned disabled residents. One of the biggest issues we found when we were doing our research last year on the state of social housing waiting times was the level of data which is out there for accessible housing is atrocious. Because it is in each council, it is very different. Some will inject it into their regular sort of general needs pot. Some will have a different approach. Some might not even consider wheelchair accessible houses to be a different category entirely. There's very little in the sort of the stock standard which can be assessed by independent people and by the public. And so, to your point around improving data standards, it is absolutely essential across multiple ways, and something which definitely the Mayor can lead on.
Sorry, did you?
I'm just going to add around disaggregated data, really, like when you're asking for data and, typically a London local authority would be able to tell us how many households were disqualified, but the moment you ask for the number of children, they can't. Yeah. So I think there is lots of data on the numbers of children in temporary accommodation, yes, quite rightly, but there also needs to be data around allocation decisions and how they are keeping children in temporary accommodation, most probably to their detriment. Yeah. We don't have that. And we met with one local borough last week who said that they have a number of KPIs and that they follow, and that this is never one that they consider to be in their KPI. And I think we're only starting to explore that, but I think as a committee I would definitely urge you to think about what those KPIs are, and if actually in terms of what KPIs are each London borough around allocations, what data are they collecting is a huge piece of work. And maybe that's already been done, maybe you can tell me that, but it was eye-opening that they'd never even thought that would be, they should ask their analysts for that information.
Yeah.
And just to come back on that as well, which is absolutely correct. The reason why I'm very passionate about this is because to have that data standard in a single council is really, really important, but to not have it impedes the like-for-like standard. So you can't compare a single borough in London to other England local authorities or to international comparisons, which is so important for policy making and important for tackling those sort of issues of equality and human rights. In the cases when we were going out for freedom of information requests last year, 2/3 were happy to provide, but even in those 2/3, the wide variance of the amount of data we had, some were reporting in days, some were reporting in financial input and output, some were saying weeks and years. There is very little coordination in this area, which makes the likes of policymakers really, really difficult.
Yeah, let me challenge it a little bit, and just to put this in context, I think data is massively important. I probably spend more of my recommendations that I lead are about we need more data than anything else. In social housing, I think, and we heard it from the panel at the last meeting, I think it's fair to say that they're going, everyone we give social housing to is in need. Do you know what I mean? We could try and cut it another way, but that just means these people in need would not. Do you know what I mean? So I definitely don't think that you're saying that, that's what councils are doing. So can you, apart from us who make policy being able to make better policy, what are the practical outcomes, do you think? How could councils be doing their job better if they were collecting that sort of standardised data and making sure it was properly disaggregated, and not just sort of, let's face it, collecting the data that they think gets them closer to what their urgent need to deliver? Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that's about. Data should drive decision making. It should drive then what does our policy look like? What does our practice look like? What does our services look like? There's no local authority official statistics on housing waiting lists that shows you how many disabled people are on there that need to move because of their disability.
Yes.
We know there's around about 130,000 households in temporary accommodation. The best estimate on disabled people that need to move because of their disability is 400,000. So yes, homeless people in temporary accommodation absolutely need to be prioritised for an allocation of social housing. But you know what? If that estimate, which is from Habentag Housing Association that specialise in disabled housing, if that estimate is accurate, then there's 4 times more disabled people that need to move because of their disability, who have got just as horrendous housing circumstances as those people that are homeless. But because we've got no official statistics on how many disabled people need to move or on housing registers, we don't really know, therefore, how much accessible housing we should be building or existing homes we should be adapting. So, and we don't know really then how to tailor our services to make sure that they're accessible in all senses of the word to disabled people that might need to use them.
Yes. I think is that something that is worth us looking at. We don't have any more time to look at. This is the last meeting. But in terms of the data collected through housing can also help the link-up services as well, because, you know, absolutely we've had meetings where we know that we need to build more accessible housing. We need more data on that. But in order to do that, we also need more social housing. Do you know what I mean? What are those other outcomes, apart from making sure they're the right homes for people? What other outcomes might be able to be driven by that data?
Yeah, it's better quality services, it's more informed practice. It's things like maintaining the London Accessible Housing Register so that, again, we make best use of stock that is already adapted and we exploit our asset to its full potential. Yeah. So it should be driving policy and practice.
Yeah, and just sort of on the end piece and why councils should really be investing in this and improving their resourcing is, if you have better data, you have better knowledge of who your social housing residents are and their needs. You can also drive improvements in your stock. So if you can downsize certain, incentivise the downsizes of certain residents, improve the quality through retrofit, through access to benefits. There is not just a needs issue here. There is also a really good, local government resourcing potential here through the improved data. So it comes around in a circle. Is if you have better data, you can govern social housing better, and if you can govern social housing better, you have better services.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that from a slightly different perspective, if local authorities in London had better data on knowing how many households and what type of households were being disqualified. Yeah. There's lots of conversations we've been having about the cost-benefit analysis of keeping a family in temporary accommodation versus actually if you'd work with that family in terms of income maximisation, if you'd work with them potentially to do the taboo thing, which is to write off those rent arrears and to work on tenancy sustainability, how much money could you have saved that local authority? A large amount. But if you've not got those figures, you don't know how much you're saving.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Go for it. Back to you then. No, it's just. Do we need to be absolutely clear what the mayor should do in this area, or do you think?
I think Daniel touched on a couple of things.
Sorry, I'm already way over my time.
No, it's all good. It's I mentioned that the mayor can certainly convene a data standard for this. There is an opportunity here to use the progress made through the Housing Moves programme, which already sort of targets individual vulnerable groups, and sadly was met with extreme need and had to sort of narrow itself. There is an opportunity to use that learning as well as the learning from local authorities to see what a data standard could look like, work with the private sector, and engage local authorities and actually what is available and what is not, because there will be some boroughs which will have an excess of certain amount of homes or vulnerable households. The data that can be combined in a sort of pan-London data standard will be really effective, not just for the local authorities but for the mayor as well, for future policy targeting.
Thank you.
Great, that was helpful. Thank you. Over to Assembly Member Small-Edwards on social tenant mobility.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My question is to Daniel. How do you think the allocation system in London could better address over-occupancy and encourage downsizing?
Really good question. It's fair to say that social housing landlords in London are very stock efficient. So at the moment, sort of 8% of London's social housing stock is under-occupied, so that means they have an extra bedroom than they need. Compare that to the owner-occupied sector, which has around 48% of under-occupation. There's a real, local authorities it's in their gift to be able to be more efficient with their stock. It also begs the question, if we had a more proactive approach to the owner-occupation issues of the owner-occupied sector and their levels of under-occupation, we might have more housing in general, not just social housing. But, I mean, at a local authority level, there has been some real progress in how local authorities are approaching the issues of right sizing. So I mentioned earlier the kind of financial incentives, whether that's through having a certain amount per room which is let out, or the downsizing of spaces. But as we've noticed in our research, it's not just about having a financial incentive. It's actually the vulnerable households who need moving support. So they'll need a moving van, or they'll need to be disconnected from their broadband, or similar things. It's that kind of level of practical support, which often some local authorities are much better at it. I do have a number of case studies, but I won't name and shame. There is certainly some opportunities to expand on that, and definitely work with the VCSE sector to expand on it as well.
There's a case just come in there. I just wanted to raise the story of one of our participants in relation to kind of social tenant mobility, because I think it really illustrates some of the ongoing nature of this trap of kind of debt, even for those who eventually do move into the social housing sector. So this participant of ours, who's very kindly okayed us to share her story, was one of the people that we worked with who had experienced, who'd been a victim of domestic abuse, temporary accommodation, housing-related debt, barred her from applying for social housing. She eventually overcame all of that, was offered a two-bed social home in a London borough that I won't name, which she lived in with her two children, who recently grew up and moved out. She alerted her local authority that she was now under occupying, was immediately hit with arrears. So she was just kind of paying off all of these debts accrued through the allocation process, then hit with a £484 bill, notified she's now responsible for an additional £96 a month via the bedroom tax going forwards. This was all through her triggering conversations with her local authority about downsizing. She then is also struggling to downsize, as all the one-beds in her local area, the monthly rent is more than her current two-bed, even with the £96 a month extra of the bedroom tax. So there is what we kind of term the debt trap in our book in relation to homelessness, temporary accommodation allocations, unfortunately often continues even into entry into the social housing sector. So there's a real kind of knot that we see there.
And also then that debt that she's got for the bedroom tax may then preclude her from being placed in the one bed that she has just found. So she's stuck and she can't downsize. It's so punitive, and so needlessly she wants to downsize but she can't.
Thank you very much for that additional context. I'm just wondering whether Daniel or any other panellists had views on the Housing Moves and Seaside and Country Home scheme.
Yes, I mentioned Housing Moves, and I think it's, as a sort of, I would say, pilot programme. It's been in operation a while. It has been successful in driving pan-London moves, and I think that's really important, particularly for those vulnerable categories, which there are certainly opportunities to target particular households who are open to pan-London moving. As I mentioned earlier, if we're concentrating on a sort of place instead of policy approach, expanding that Housing Moves programme to more vulnerable groups without additional capacity and without more supply, and ideally with much better coordination with the boroughs in terms of what their general needs are and their stock is like. It's a very good pilot, but it definitely needs more capacity to be a fully working pan-London model. On the Seaside Moves programme as well, 150 is the target households to be moving to a nice place by the sea, which is definitely really positive. It's unfortunately a bit of a drop in the ocean compared to the wider needs that are needed by local authorities. And while it is and should be supported, there's also this sort of countering of a narrative of London is exporting its temporary accommodation, exporting its social housing population, and it's something to consider when we're talking about social housing, and that we don't fall into the trap of considering, households who are very, in many cases, very vulnerable with lots of different complex needs, that we're considering them to be export, because that's not what we should be doing.
Thank you. Just on your response earlier about support that's provided by some boroughs, and you obviously don't want to name and shame those not acting well. Do you have any particular boroughs or any particular schemes that you would want to shout about and maybe could be lessons for other boroughs in London in terms of what they should be doing when people are moving out of social housing?
So I mean, as I mentioned, Hammersmith and Fulham have a really developed sort of practical approach. I've mentioned a kind of very easy kind of support that they can provide on the ground. One example I give often is Richmond, which is a really interesting borough for talking about social housing, because it wasn't a registered provider until fairly recently, and used another external RP to use as a social housing provider. They've really upscaled on what they can deliver per room for maximising this stock efficiency of their social housing, which is really important because Richmond has a sort of older than most borough, so they have a higher number of older residents who can effectively downsize if needed. This is a real potential for Outer London, where there are more older residents. But I will just add to that as well, is that as demographics change, as families move, as housing costs in London become more tricky for social, not just for social housing but for wider housing as well, the needs in Inner London and Outer London will definitely change. The stock needs will change, and then you have to see this adapt into something from the social housing, the approach to social housing as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. Just over to Assemblymember Boff.
Thing is, I've been hearing these arguments for the best part of over 40 years. When I first became a councillor, we had, back in the 80s, we had financial incentives to downsize, we had seaside schemes encouraging people to move out of the borough, and we paid quite a bit of money for people to downsize from a 4-bedroom. And it's why, even though local authorities are criticised by modern-day YIMBYs, it's why local authorities built bungalows. And there's such an inefficient use of space, bungalows. Actually, they are very efficient for attracting downsizers. So what's new in this area? What's the level of financial incentive we should pay? And just from memory, I may be wrong, but we used to pay in Hillingdon, if somebody was to go down from a 4-bedroom down to a couple of bedrooms, it was somewhere in the region of a couple of grand at that time, which for inflation must be about 10 grand now, or a lot of money now. Give us an example of what local authorities are actually paying as a financial incentive.
Other people on the panel here might know about values of incentives. I take your point about there's lots of work been going on around under occupation for many years. The last time national government did any work on it, targeted, was around 2008, 2009. They did a very big campaign of work with local authorities and housing associations to get them to do more around reducing under occupation and overcrowding in tandem with one another. And it is a regulatory requirement for registered providers to deliver services for under occupiers. But the fact remains, you're more likely to downsize if you're over the age of 72 after you've had an accident in your home. Getting people to surrender their home and downside is a bit like getting a sole driver in a car that can fit 4 or 5 people in it to take passengers with them. It's right. We should be aspiring to it, but there's a lot of nudge that needs to be done to get people there.
It's not a golden bullet. That's the trouble. Absolutely. And I see a lot of people telling us that, if only we solved all the overcrowding problems and sorted that out in the under occupation. The under-occupation problems, we'd sort that out. It's never been sorted out by that. Is it fair to say that it is not a golden bullet?
I would agree with that.
And just on your sort of financial values, I mean, doing research not just for this but for our last report, was the actual level of financial support is, by bedroom, absolutely varies across borough by borough based on the sort of housing needs of the borough. You can see sort of roughly anything from £500 to £3,000 a room.
That surprises me how low that is, because the value to the local authorities is way much more than that.
Absolutely, and as you say, the value for local authorities to actually incentivise that downsizing is really strong. It's where that level of practical support has actually come in quite stronger. In engaging with housing associations who do the same kind of thing, and the stock in housing associations is a bit more fluid than it is in local authorities. But that level of practical support has come in as a sort of a different level of offer, but not the level of financial support which is perhaps needed.
And there is some value in doing some work to figure out what is working and what people are doing well. People that want to downsize can be exempt from qualification criteria. They can have their rent arrears allowed to go with them. They can be given extra priority. There's lots that can be done, and there is a role to say, well, what is being done and what is actually working, rather than what could work. Let's find out what actually is working.
That's a good point. Right, we've got like a minute, Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Just the conversation we've just had about downsizing, does that mainly apply to local authority-owned homes and housing association-owned homes? What's the conversation around people who own privately?
I mean, I don't know of any work that's been done to encourage homeowners to downsize when they're under occupying. I think it would be a very brave politician that would pursue that programme.
Why? Well, I said I can release that big 4-bedroom house to families, and
Yeah, so...
Yeah, that's the other point.
I don't necessarily disagree with your point, but
It might be harder, but I just because you have to look at the stock of London, who actually is in these homes. Most oversized homes or extra capacity are probably in private hands, not in the hands of local authorities. And if we could get those people to downsize as well, it would change the nature of housing in London, wouldn't it?
So I think this is a similar principle to holiday homes and second homes, and the approaches that, again, Wales, for example, have taken in some areas around second homes, the approach that Scotland has taken around licensing of holiday lets. I think these things should be looked at as we're looking at how to maximise our housing stock to its full potential. We should be looking at all tenures, including under-occupiers in the private rented sector as well. And overcrowding across all tenures. I do think there needs to be a broad approach. I think it's harder to convince a homeowner that owns an asset outright or on a mortgage to downsize. I think there's less tangible incentives you can give to a homeowner compared to a social housing tenant.
Okay, Daniel, for the final comment.
Yeah, final comment from me, particularly on the owner-occupied sort of sector, is that we're at Centre for Loan, we're currently doing a piece of work on this very issue of maximising stock. And one of the biggest reasons why people don't want to downsize is stamp duty, and the tax environment is not very capable of supporting that downsizing. And if you wanted to maximise the availability of stock, absolutely the politics of it are a little tricky, but there is real potential in London, because it not just solves the issue of not having enough supply, but it solves the issue of there being a housing wealth disparity, where there's an awful lot of wealth that people have in their homes, but they don't necessarily have a lot of cash. The cash poor asset rich issue, where lots of people have their pensions in their homes and they have their care plans in their homes. Maximising that fluidity and the market fluidity is really important, and it's something I dare say that the private sector could learn from the social housing sector, where local authorities do have the sort of lion's share of ability to actually influence stock transfer.
Thank you.
Just one time, I actually think you could influence people who own the home to downsize. I really do. And Chair,
I've got 3 spare bedrooms and I'm not downsizing.
Okay, we're going to end this now.
This is serious. Chair, can you request that research when he's finished?
Yes, I was going to say, when is your research that you just mentioned then?
So the research will be launched at our Housing Summit in late April.
Great.
So we'll be publishing it then.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you so much, guests. We probably could have spoken to you for a lot longer, but really appreciate your contributions. There were some questions we didn't get to, which were sent to you in writing, nothing too difficult or lengthy, but really appreciate your contributions today. So thank you to our first panel, and we're going to have a short break of about 5 minutes and resume for our second panel. Thank you. Welcome back to today's Housing Committee, where we're discussing housing allocations, or allocations in social housing. Can I please welcome our second panel of guests? So we've got Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor of Housing and Residential Development, and Rory Wheel, Interim Head of Housing Strategy at the Greater London Authority. So we've got a series of questions, and I'll be starting. So starting with you, Deputy Mayor. So as we've discussed on a number of occasions, we've got huge supply issues, but today we're going to really try and focus on kind of social housing allocations and some of the programmes the Mayor's got. So trying to stay looking at social housing allocations. So within that context, what are the main challenges facing London's social housing allocation system?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good to be with you today. I think, obviously, you say we're not here to discuss supply, but I think the main issue, of course, is the sort of overall supply of social housing and the lack of social housing. So that the main way that the Mayor can address that is, of course, through the Social and Affordable Homes Programme, which will be launched next year, as well as his current Affordable Homes Programme, or Affordable Homes Programme, sorry. And we've seen particular success in terms of those. 87,000 affordable homes completed in London since 2016. And the revival of council housing, which I think is the most important part of this in this context. So the best lever that the Mayor has to ensure that the needs of Londoners who are in need of social housing are met is by growing the supply of social housing and council housing. And that's why, starting the most council homes since the 1970s is really, really important. Now, in terms of allocations of social housing, the Mayor's housing strategy is quite clear about this, and it's quite clear that this is something that is the responsibility of councils and, to a lesser extent, housing associations. So to quote the housing strategy, the Mayor will respect councils and housing associations' independence in deciding how best to manage and allocate their affordable homes, other than where there is a compelling justification for pan-London consistency. And in fact, the Mayor doesn't have any powers, has no powers at all, to enforce any kind of allocations policies on boroughs, and indeed no real desire to do so. I mean, the Mayor is of the view that boroughs are best placed to understand the need in their areas and to allocate social housing accordingly. Now, there are a number of much smaller scale schemes where the Mayor does have a role in nominating, which I presume you will have some questions on, but just to highlight those. The Housing Move schemes, which of course helps victims and survivors of domestic abuse and former rough sleepers, and the Seaside and Country Homes Programme, which is open to over 55s living in social housing in London who are under-occupying and who wish to move to the seaside or to the country. Those are the only real sort of ways that the Mayor can nominate people or allocate people to social housing. Beyond that, it really is the responsibility of the boroughs, and the Mayor's main lever is in increasing the supply of social housing.
Thank you. So in terms of the housing strategy, is there anything that the Mayor does to kind of measure the effectiveness of the housing strategy with regards to allocations? Is that something that's looked at?
I don't think that we nominate. I don't think that we monitor allocations of local authorities. I mean, that really is something that is up to them. We really are strongly of the view that local authorities are best placed to understand the particular needs of groups in their area and to come up with a allocations policy accordingly. The government, as you're probably aware, as part of its National Homelessness Strategy, has launched a national review of allocations policies, and the GLA, and I think particularly through the work we're doing on the Ending Homelessness Accelerator programme, will of course be feeding into that review. But in terms of actually sort of monitoring allocations, I don't think that's something we do, unless Rory is going to tell me something different.
No, I don't. We don't do kind of collective reviews of overall allocations policies, but when it comes to assessing progress against certain objectives, for example, tackling domestic abuse, violence against women and girls, homelessness, reducing temporary accommodation and rough sleeping, we will look at those areas and we will monitor what's happening in terms of housing outcomes, and obviously policies and programmes may be developed off the back of that. So as was just mentioned, the Housing Moves programme, following a review, was really targeted at victims, survivors of domestic abuse and people with histories of rough sleeping, because of the evidence of the primacy of those groups, and in particular, a view that there was a role for City Hall to play in facilitating some cross-borough moves for those particular groups, where, due to a lack of safety, for example, or due to an imperative to make better use of kind of cross-London provision, we believe there was a space we could kind of step into and support there. So that would be the space in which we'd sort of monitor the outcomes for those groups and adjust those programmes according to what the data shows.
Great, thank you. That was a helpful description. Just on what you said there, Deputy Mayor, the panel we've literally just heard from were talking about the role of a kind of pan-London allocations, potentially some form of pan-London allocation system, and talking about the differences between kind of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and different kind of models. Is that ever anything that is in discussion, between the Mayor and the local authorities? Or
to my knowledge, Chair, it's not something that's ever been raised directly with me as something that we should be doing beyond. As I say, the sort of smaller programmes I've just mentioned that we do nominate to. It's not something that's been raised with me. I have to say, and I'd have to test this, but I'm not sure how welcome it would be with boroughs for the Mayor to start stepping in and I mean, we don't have the power to impose, as I've said. But in being seen perhaps to interfere in what boroughs are doing in terms of allocations. And of course, legally speaking, it is boroughs who have the nomination rights to the vast majority of social housing.
And that was very much why I said in discussion with local authorities, not dictating to them.
I mean, and just to say as well, if London councils, as in Big L, Big C, collectively, came to me and said, we think it would be really helpful if the Mayor were to do something in this space, of course we would take that on board and we would consider if there was any value that we could add. But it's not something that they've approached me about.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooper with a follow-up question.
No, not a follow-up. I think we've just covered off what I wanted to inquire about. Thank you.
Great. Assemblymember Boff.
How often has Housing Moves been used? What are the last 4 years?
I can give you the figures, Assemblymember Boff. And the first thing to say is that both Housing Moves and Seaside and Country Homes are oversubscribed. So Housing Moves between 2022, 2023 and 24-25, Housing Moves has supported 303 people, including 122 victims and survivors of domestic abuse and 181 people with experience of rough sleeping into safe and permanent social rented homes.
There have been some criticisms of Housing Moves, that it remains limited in scale. Mr. Wheel, you just referred to the change in criteria. How has that affected the numbers using the scheme since 2022?
Yeah, so it was in 2022 that obviously this review concluded, and that review came in response to the fact that, as you said, the balance between demand for homes and for moves within London was significantly outstripping supply of those homes, and the review kind of looked at the mismatch between demand and supply and concluded that it was appropriate to target the limited resource that we had in terms of relets that are becoming available across London that we would have a nomination right to. It was appropriate to target that more effectively. On the one hand, to kind of better manage expectations of applicants. We were getting lots of applicants and it was significantly oversubscribed. It's still oversubscribed, but now that we've targeted it much more clearly at kind of two groups that we think there's a real kind of particular and evidence need, we've obviously seen a reduction in applications. It still exceeds the supply, but that is much more proximate than it was prior to 2022 when those the eligibility was much, much wider for the scheme.
Was the scheme used more prior to 2022 than after 2022?
I don't believe so in any significant way. I'd have to look at the figures prior to 2022 when it was a different set of eligible cohorts. But it's primarily dictated by the frequency at which relets come up.
Exactly. It's about the supply, but I would appreciate if you could send us those previous year's data as well.
We'll get you the figures. And can I add, I don't disagree with your premise of your question, Assembly Member Boff. The number of homes is more limited than I think that we would like. And I'm certainly very open to considering how we can expand the scheme. One thing I would say is that, as we had with LLDC, with OPDC, the GLA will be receiving nomination rights to 10% of the social rented properties that are built within the OPDC area. So that will be a growth area for homes to come through on housing moves. And I'm very open to considering other ways that we can look to expand the scheme as well.
So you're open to expanding the scheme?
Absolutely.
Open to expanding the criteria?
I think if the scheme were to expand to and I don't know what the threshold would be, but I think that restricting the criteria to these two very, very in-need groups, and particularly in need for, pan-London moving, I think it's right in the context of quite a restricted pool of properties. If we were to expand it to the point where there were many more properties, I would be happy to review the criteria.
Yeah. And how many accessible homes are included in the scheme per annum?
I don't believe I have those figures, Assembly Member Boff, but when we write to you with the other figures you requested, we can provide you with those figures as well.
Do we have those figures?
If we do,
If we do. Do you have the figures?
And in response to some of the committee's other very helpful investigations, we are improving our data collection around accessible housing. If we have the information, I will absolutely provide it to you.
Thank you very much. And if you're taking action on that, then that's something this committee has done well.
It is. No, I will be the first to say that.
I think I've covered my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. So over to Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you. My questions are on the Seaside and Country Homes programme. So can you let us know what you feel the impact the Seaside and Country Homes programme has had to date, and whether there's any scope for expanding the programme?
Thank you, Assembly Member Baker. I love the Seaside and Country Homes programme. It was a programme that we inherited from the GLC. It was established under the GLC when the GLC built or acquired around 3,300, I think mainly bungalows, but perhaps other typologies as well, outside of London, to enable older residents to move out. And it's something that the GLA has run since 2011. And we have strong evidence that it provides huge benefits. So first of all, it provides a very major benefit to boroughs in terms of freeing up family-sized housing, and we know how precious family-sized housing is. That is of enormous benefit to boroughs and to residents who are overcrowded who need a family-sized property. But there are also significant benefits to the older people themselves who move out. So a 2022 study conducted by the National Institute for Health and Care Research found that the programme has had a positive impact on tenants' mental well-being through allowing them to move to quieter environments and more suitable homes. And it also allows people perhaps to move closer to family and to friends as well. So I think it has multiple benefits, both for freeing up family-sized housing and for the well-being of older people.
Thanks.
Sorry. The second part of your question was about expanding the programme.
Yes. Now, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Because then, so we've had some evidence. Both. I mean, look, it's a good thing. It's clear to anyone that some people will definitely, but relatively small numbers at the moment. So, is there any? We've had some evidence indicating that a larger awareness of the programme would help, but also we had evidence in the last meeting that there's a real challenge because there's a lack of stock everywhere now. It's not just London. So balancing those two things, do you think that more could be done? Could it be expanded? Would awareness raising help? or are we sort of at the ceiling already? What's your assessment of that?
I'm always pro awareness raising, but I do think it is oversubscribed many times over. So it would be great for more people to be aware of it, for more people to sort of be able to access it. But you know, I think we'd have to acknowledge that it would be a sort of growing waiting list. In terms of an expansion of the programme, I was actually talking to Rory about this before this meeting, because it seems to me that would be a really good thing. I think it is a bit challenging for us, the GLA. We are not, as far as I'm aware, my understanding is we are not permitted to fund either acquisition or new development of housing outside of London. So that would be an issue. So I think if we were to do it, we'd have to have some sort of cooperation and deal with Homes England and perhaps with MHCLG as well. But it's definitely something I'm open to exploring because of the benefits that we have just discussed.
Yeah. Is there anything similar outside London, or is this a sort of London thing? Just because if we wanted to get Homes London on side, Homes England on side, then are they just like, well, it's just a London thing? Or, you know, because it would seem to be, it's not just Londoners that would like to move to the coast when they get older. So is that not...
So not
is there
to
a bit
my
of a barrier?
knowledge, but that doesn't mean there isn't, but not to my knowledge.
No. Sorry, it's cheeky because, you know,
yeah.
the Deputy Mayor for Housing for London, not for... so.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a kind of equivalent of housing moves in the rest of the country,
yes.
where I presume, you know, there is the option for people to perhaps they live in a city like Manchester to, you know, see if there's a place by the seaside that they could move to.
Yes.
So there is a national kind of housing move scheme. I forget the Home Search, is it? Something
but
like that.
But it's not targeted.
But it's not targeted. No. No.
You know, older people moving to the. Just to say, you said we may have this data, but you said it's many times oversubscribed. Do we have? We don't. I don't think we have data on how many people apply. We know how many people get it, but not how many people apply.
We can give you a bit of data here, and perhaps we could furnish you with a little bit more after the meeting. So since 2020-21, we've had 3,809 applications. Last year alone, 646 applications. Let me give you the corresponding figure. Sorry. So since 2020-21, 3,809 applications and 795 successful moves. So that's about 800 moves out of nearly 4,000 applications. So you see the disparity there.
And is there any review in terms of the process that might be able to give people a better understanding of how likely they were to be able to get the move or anything like that? Just
yes, we're reviewing both seaside and country homes and housing moves next year.
Right, fantastic. Is there, and some people are turned down, relatively small numbers, I say. Do you have any understanding of why those people are turned down? I know it's not... that wouldn't be directly yourselves, would it? But is there any concern about the reasons that they were turned down? Are you comfortable that that is being done fairly?
So I've not had any information to suggest it's not being done fairly. I think the information I have is I think 3% of applicants are turned down. It can be as a result of ongoing antisocial behaviour, for example, or rent arrears. But to emphasise that the receiving landlord also has discretion over these things as well. So it's not an automatic kind of, as far as I'm aware, an automatic no. Yeah. But there is discretion for the landlord who is receiving the tenant, potentially.
I think those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you. I was just going to follow up on the review that you mentioned next year and what the kind of framework for that is, the outcome or the process that is going to be followed.
I think I'll probably have to furnish you with more information about that after the meeting, unless, Rory, have you got any information on exactly how we're going to be conducting that?
I'm happy to share a little bit. So we're at the stage now of basically scoping the parameters of the review. So I think the intention is that it'll conclude by the end of the summer, and obviously this session today and the work of the committee is very timely to help inform the scope and ultimate conclusions of it. I think the scheme, I can't remember the exact date it was last reviewed, but I think as ever with these programmes, it's important to just ensure that processes are operating in the most effective way possible, that it's targeting the right cohorts, that information is kind of sufficiently widespread. So the review will kind of look at all of those factors. I think there's also a benefit in really looking at the kind of strategic purpose of the scheme as well. So as has come up in the preceding session, the scheme has been around in one form or another for quite a long time now, many decades, and obviously it's been within the scope of the GLA in its current form since 2011, I believe. But it's a particular set of properties that obviously were kind of built largely in the kind of 60s and 70s, but it kind of stands in isolation, if you like. So there's a real question about, okay, well, what are the principles from this work that could be applied elsewhere? Perhaps what learning is there that we could look at applying to other schemes? So I think they're the kinds of questions we'll be asking as we kind of adopt the review in the new year.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen. The committee's heard evidence about the unfairness in social housing allocations. Would the GLA consider publishing guidance or launching a training programme for local housing authorities to support them to deliver high-quality professional services that treat applicants fairly and with respect? And just before you answer that, I go back to this idea of a common register. I think there's two versions of that, isn't there? One is one where we have London-wide allocations. I don't think anybody's interested in that. But another version where wherever you apply, the form and the criteria is the same. That would be very hard to achieve, I imagine, but far more achievable than the idea that you'd have a London-wide allocation scheme, as it were. So, but, pick any of those questions to dodge and, get on with it.
Thank you, Assembly Member Lord Bailey. So we don't have any plans to produce any guidance at a London level, but as I mentioned earlier to the Chair, the government has launched a very timely national review of allocations, which we will absolutely be engaging with and feeding into, particularly through our work on ending homelessness. So actually, I think that will be where our focus will be in terms of allocations and fairness, and we absolutely agree that social housing allocations should be fair. But I think the place for us to have that engagement will be with this national review. In terms of training up officers, it's not something until this very moment that has been raised with me before. We have offered training to boroughs in other areas. For example, we did this on enforcement officers, private rented sector, and things like that. I would caution that at this moment, we don't, we don't really have any budget to take up what you have suggested. But as I said to the Chair earlier, we're always open to, if London councils come to us and say, could you help us with something, to look at what we can do with the proviso we don't have sort of infinite resources.
Yeah, I understand, because this is a difficult area, and I think allocations, if you started them tomorrow, they might look very different to how they do today, but of course they were started ages ago, and we've got a very complex system. I think the question I'll ask you is just slightly unrelated. Do you think this is even possible? Because what's going on in Havering is different to Hammersmith, different to Isleworth, different to Ealing. Is there a route? Can you see a way that it could be universalised? I personally think it's tricky to impossible. But I
agree. I think I agree with you, Assembly Member Lord Bailey. I don't think. I think even if we had a majority of boroughs on side, there would still be some boroughs that would say, "Well, hang on, we don't agree with this. Our local needs are different." And as I say, there's never been a sort of, to my knowledge, a clamouring from boroughs for the GLA to step into this space. In fact, I'd probably say almost the opposite, that boroughs, they do want to be able to set their own allocation policies in line with their own assessment of what the greatest needs are in their areas.
Just before I do want to turn to this idea of a common register, because I think one of the real difficulties as an end user who someone's trying to get on is that the allocation process looks very different in almost every single borough. And is there some scope for at least a conversation, but maybe more among the boroughs, and the Mayor could suggest they have the conversation rather than he lead it? I understand how that might be difficult. Could there at least standardise areas of the process, if not the entire process, because that, I believe, would go a long way to delivering the idea of fairness.
Can you say a bit more, sorry, about what you mean by a common register?
So imagine I apply to get on the register in Ealing. It looks different to the form in Hammersmith or in Havering. The criteria is different, the length of the form is different, the proof I have to provide is different. Is there a way that somebody could streamline, if not make the process the same everywhere?
Oh, so a bit more standardisation. Yeah. I sort of feel that perhaps some of this can be picked up in... I think the government at the moment is doing quite a bit of work on standardisation around IT and local government sort of IT services and their kind of front doors and things like that. So it might be something that can be looked at as part of that, but I don't really feel I can give a sort of firm answer to you at this moment, Assemblyman Lord-Bailey. But I mean, I understand the principle, which is that you know, people have to navigate all sorts of different systems, and it can be very confusing.
Yeah. I was chanced by arm, but Chair, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the point with this, because when I was in the NHS and we used to try and redesign systems, it's obviously that reminder that you need to make sure it works for the people using them, not just for the people administering it. And I think this is very much that area, because in our first investigation, we were hearing from deaf and disabled Londoners, you know, about the different forms and, you know, how confusing it all was. Like, you know, they were crying out for that standardisation. So I think it's that balance between a system that works, but also, you know, just really hearing the voices from the people trying to use it. We did have a question in this area around, I know you said that, you know, the training might not be in the scope of funding and things, but if the Mayor would consider holding a roundtable with local authorities and local councils to discuss equity in the housing association, social housing allocation?
That's probably something that I should perhaps pick up with Grace Williams, exec member at London Councils, to see if that is something that they would welcome. I wouldn't rule it out, but I'd want to have a discussion with them about it first.
Just to add to that, I think one of the areas where some of those conversations are most fruitful is in the homelessness space. So, Tom mentioned this very briefly, but we've set up a new set of governance arrangements for the homelessness system in London, which is all about trying to facilitate closer collaboration between the GLA, sub-regions and London's boroughs. And one of the aspects of that work is exploring if there's a heightened role for sub-regions as coordinating entities for different aspects of the homelessness system. And the principle of it doesn't just directly relate to allocations, but I think it indirectly does. You know, that's an infrastructure we think there is kind of real potential to explore consistency where we can. It's obviously really led by kind of colleagues in London councils and boroughs, but I think is the kind of most appropriate space for these conversations to be held. And I think if there is kind of clear evidence, there's appetite from a certain sub-region to try and do things in a more consistent way, then obviously we'll always be open to those representations and explore how we can kind of add capacity and enable where we can.
Great. And yeah, we did have Grace and local authorities in our second panel talking about, you know, like you were saying, it comes down to kind of priorities and things, but yeah, that's welcomed. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you. Just to come back to the point about training, one of the things that we heard from our first panel this afternoon was that it's not just complex for people applying, but the whole housing system and the fact that things change and new laws come in fairly frequently, obviously one very recently, the Renters' Rights Act, and it makes it quite difficult for staff, and there isn't a sort of ongoing professional development or, you know, need for them to necessarily be qualified in the sort of legal aspects. So I hear what you say about sort of maybe the GLA isn't the right body to lead on training, and obviously there would be a resource requirement, but is there a more appropriate body? Is this something that maybe the Chartered Institute of Housing needs to be picking up in a more thorough way, just to ensure that we do get that proper fairness and access to housing that perhaps sometimes, I mean, I think housing is a really difficult profession at the moment and is perhaps understaffed as well, but I just wonder what your thoughts on that might be.
Potentially, yes. Without wanting to sort of punt it onto the Chartered Institute of Housing, but as an example, the private rented training that I mentioned around enforcement, we did that in conjunction with the Chartered Institute for Environmental Health. So I can very much see the logic in what you're saying in terms of this perhaps being an area for the Chartered Institute of Housing. I think we face an issue across the board, actually, with very broadly in my area, skills, whether it's housing officers, whether it's trained building safety professionals, whether it's construction workers. There is a major issue in all of these areas. So I think it probably does warrant some further scrutiny, investigation, and action.
Or potentially something that we could make some recommendations about when we've finished this inquiry.
Indeed.
In terms of, what we're suggesting maybe needs to happen. I mean, I think there is this deficit in the sector now, and particularly because pay is where it is. I think that's why there's vacancies arising. We all know the situation in London for people in the private rented sector, people trying to access purchasing, and it's almost impossible, even if you're working in housing, to get allocated social housing yourself, even though some of them might actually be eligible because of the, where the rules are now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
My question 11, I think, has been answered on previous reply. But I had a supplementary on that the Mayor has recently written to us about women leaving prison. It didn't in there seem to indicate what we were calling for, which was a pan-London approach to women leaving prison. Have you got any updates since that letter about what action is being taken to try and get that going in London? Because, and I understand the arguments against a pan-London approach. I absolutely get it. But there are some particular client groups who, if they do not get housing, there is a very strong likelihood that they will appear again in housing need. They may find themselves offending again. They may go back to those same people who perhaps forced them to commit that crime. And therefore it's worthwhile a pan-London approach to get the boroughs to realise that this particular group is a priority.
I think this is exactly the sort of thing that should and will be taken up through the Ending Homelessness Accelerator programme. That's exactly the place where we should have this conversation. So we will ensure that we do that. I mean, I've, as you know, visited Bronzefield prison, met some of the women there who said straight up that, when they're released, they would reoffend so they could go back to prison because they didn't want to spend time on the streets. And that was absolutely galling. So I agree with you. It's something where action needs to be taken. I recently visited one of the services that we fund through, two of the services that we fund through our DASA programme in Camden that work with some of those very women who have been released from prison. So I think it's an important issue. I think it's one that we have to take up and take. It is part of the Mayor's rough sleeping plan of action, and it's something that we will take up through the Ending Homeless Accelerator programme.
Thank you. I appreciate that and look forward to seeing what the outcome is. You alluded to earlier about the paucity, well, I won't say paucity, the data on accessible housing wasn't quite at where it could be. So would the GLA consider reinstating the London Accessible Housing Register?
So this is the first time this has been raised with me, Assembly Member Boff. I'm aware that it's not been updated, I think, since 2011, although the resources are still there. I think only a couple of boroughs use them. So it's not a no, but this is the first time this has been raised with me, and I'm going to have to take that away and look at it.
I'd appreciate it if perhaps you could look at it and then respond to the committee about what your decision is.
We can take that as an action.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
No, I'm fine. My question was covered.
Great. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. To what extent does a lack of coordination and join-up between councils and housing associations reduce the efficiency and effectiveness of the allocation system?
I'm not necessarily sure I agree necessarily that there is a lack of join-up between councils and housing associations. Obviously, councils have, given, the majority, I think in London, 75% of the nomination rights on all social housing go to boroughs. So, and housing associations are legally required to cooperate with boroughs when it comes to social housing allocations. So I wonder if there's any sort of specific issues with regard to those relationships that you're thinking of, you could specify.
Yeah, so I think it's around nominations. We spoke to it about the first panel as well. And in written evidence, the G15 said its members would welcome a pan-London shared framework between boroughs and housing associations in terms of nominations. Then we had Grace Williams as well, who mentioned earlier at the meeting too, who said that you and her are working on the London Housing Mission Board to look into councils' relationships with housing associations. So it's mainly in that framework.
I think it's something we would have to look at. As I say, the vast majority of social housing is nominated to by boroughs. If there are specific issues in terms of those relationships, we can look at that.
Yeah, and I do think that the recent government announcement or indication is really relevant here. So the fact that in the homelessness strategy there's that reference to looking at the allocations policy that we have in England, and obviously I'm conscious that, for example, in Scotland they have a much more kind of unified legal framework around allocations that cover both council and housing associations. So it appears that government is going to be reviewing that. So I think it would be appropriate to kind of see the conclusion of that review and to kind of inform that, and then work through the structures that we've talked about with boroughs to see what implications there are for London, and whether whatever comes from that review means that there is a strengthened case for pan-London coordination or not. That feels like an appropriate step once that kind of government direction of travel is clearer.
And if there's a case for us to, through the Ending Homelessness Accelerator programme, convene boroughs to sort of have a discussion about this, then we will absolutely do that, and that might be helpful in the context of the national review.
Completely understood. But just from where you're standing right now, would you say that you're concerned by the level of rejections or differences of opinion in terms of allocations between what the council might be setting and then whether the housing association is accepting that?
I think if a housing association is rejecting people unreasonably, then that does concern me. I've not actually seen any sort of hard data in terms of the levels of rejections, but again, it's something I can pick up myself with Grace and with London councils, and if it is a major and growing problem, then we can convene the boroughs to talk about this and what sort of action could be taken as part of this national review in order to rectify that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Boff.
The temporary housing problem is, of course, now.
Yep.
And it's most acute now.
Mm-hmm.
You could have bought more homes on the open market quicker, couldn't you? And helped council to address their temporary housing problems, rather than putting money into schemes that are going to take very many years to be completed.
Well, we've done exactly what you said, Assembly-Member Boff.
Well, I said more than you've already done.
So what I would say there, of course, is there is always going to be a sliding scale between acquisitions versus new build. Particularly in the Next Affordable Homes programme, the government, although we are going to be able to do acquisitions, which we're very pleased about, the government's been very clear that they want a focus on new build, and that's understandable. We have to achieve a balance between, as you say, getting the homes we need as quickly as possible, but also ensuring, for example, that we're able to do those kinds of long-term estate regeneration schemes in order to ensure that people who are currently living in housing that has essentially come to the end of its useful life and is no longer fit for purpose can get a brand new home. And I've also had this discussion, I should say, Assemblymember Boff, with some of your other colleagues from the other end of the spectrum who don't like us doing acquisitions. But we have acquired properties, and I think we did about 1,400 through Right to Buy Back, and I don't have the figures for CHAP, but we have the Council Homes Acquisitions Programme, but we have continued to do so, and I'm very confident that in the next programme we will have a similar programme to acquire homes to use, whether as social rented properties or as TA. And one final thing, of course, the government did announce another £900 million for LAF, which is the Local Authority Housing Fund, which also enables boroughs to buy properties for temporary accommodation.
So you think there is more scope?
I think there is scope in the next programme for us, within the limits that the government has set on acquisitions, for us to have a proportion of that programme which will continue to be dedicated to buybacks or purchases from the open market in order to provide social housing and temporary accommodation.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a final question from me is just around whether the Mayor would publish a Pan-London framework to improve the consistency and quality of data around social housing allocations. Is that something you've considered?
I mean, as I say, we don't have any plans to, but if it was something that the committee recommended, we would, of course, look at the merits of doing that and in consultation with London boroughs.
Thank you. I think that's all our questions.
Oh.
So,
well, in that case, can I just take the opportunity to wish the committee a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year?
And to you.
Thank you.
Yes, I just want to thank our guests for your contributions. And can we note the report of today's discussion? Can you delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group leads to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can we note the committee's work programme? And the next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 20th of January 2026 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber City Hall. I have no urgent business, so I declare the meeting closed.